At this portion of our study, we're able to examine the various structures that give shape to the second sublecture. 3 sections comprise this second sublecture, that is, Proverbs 25:13 through 27:22, which is the courtier portion of the sage's response to the implicit, overarching question that lends cohesion to the entire master lecture, spanning Proverbs 25 to 29, namely, how can one achieve a magnificent monarchy? In section 1 of this sub-lecture, the sage advises the courtier concerning how to conduct himself with regard to hazards of greed and generosity in the course of 7 specific relationships. That's section 1, beginning 25:13, extending to 27:4. Section 2 is concerned with reproof, how best to receive it and how best to dispense it. That spans 27:5 through 18. A 4-verse conclusion comprises section 3, that is 27:19 to 22. To appreciate the cumulative impact of certain macrostructural features, it will be instructive to note where they build on related microstructures. For that reason, in this discussion, several of the subsidiary microstructures will appear as we consider the macrostructural features. The first macrostructure that we'll look at involves recurrence of the term glory in sections 1 and 2. The term glory, in Hebrew kaved, was explored within our overview that preceded the study of Proverbs 25, 1 to 12, due to its connection with the theme of magnificence, which we have seen lends cohesion to the entire master lecture. Glory is one of the tag words then that flags this master theme of magnificence. At the present point, we'll examine more closely those instances where the term glory joins together distinct sections within this second sublecture, spanning 25:13 to 27:22. The term glory occurs within sections 1 and 2 at 4 strategic points. The first 3 of those 4 occur within section 1 and thus constitute microstructures. They're confined within a single section. The 4th takes place in section 2, so that makes a macrostructural bridge with the other 3 in section 1. Within section 1, the first block, that is block 1A, which spans 25:13 to 28, closes its penultimate verse, that is the next to the last verse, with not a single use of glory, but a double use of glory. Let's turn to that on the screen. It is chapter 25, verse 27. You can see it on the right side of the screen before you now. It reads, "To eat a large quantity of honey is not good, but to search out their glory is glory." The expression "their glory" here refers to glory belonging to God and to the king. This was evident at the start of the master lecture in 25:2. Here's how that verse reads. "The glory of God is to conceal a saying, while the glory of kings is to search out a saying." It was from this verse that we first began to realize that this master lecture is devoted to answering the question, how can a monarchy achieve or attain magnificence or glory? Now then, towards the end of chapter 5, we find this very important answer. To eat a large quantity of honey is not good, but to search out their glory, the glory of those individuals listed at the outset of the master lecture in 25:2, that is the route for a person to attain glory for him or herself. Here then in 25:27, the sage is saying that simply gorging oneself on what he calls honey, which would mean greedy tendencies to feed our own ego, such a pursuit is not good, he says, which is to say, it will not be satisfying in the long run. We might say the sugar high will wear off. Rather, the sage explains, it's by getting our eyes off of ourselves and exploring instead the depths of another person's greatness. That is the way for a person to achieve greatness for him or herself. Who should be the objects of this grandeur exploration that we should be in search of? We should focus on exploring the grandeur of God and exploring the grandeur of the monarch that God has set in place. The line terminal position of the word glory here in 25:27 is worth noting. You see, 2 verses later in 26:1, the second block, that is block 1b, which begins there in 26:1, runs through 27:4, it will open with another line terminal use of the word glory. Let's advance the page so that we can see that. Here you see 26:1. As the snow in the summer and the rain at harvest, so for a stupid fellow glory is not fitting. Line terminal use of glory is evident in the Hebrew word order. It could be represented as follows. For a stupid fellow, not fitting is glory. That's 26:1a in the Hebrew sequence. A third use of the word glory, still within section 1, again occurs in line terminal position. That happens in the second block. We're looking at 26, verse 8. You can see it now on the right side of your screen. As binding a stone into a slingshot, so is one who gives to a stupid person glory. That reads a little different than what you have on the screen. I was endeavoring to represent the Hebrew word order so that we would detect glory winds up as the line terminal word. This recurrence will prove to be quite strategic here in 26:8, since it supplies a pivot point that corresponds palistrophically to glory that we've already noted in 26:1. So 26:1, which uses glory, and 26:8, while they appear, ignoring the outline on the right side of your screen, they appear to be simply a running flow. When we uncover the palistrophic sequence that's going on here, we find that they are linked. We'll explain the palistrophic sequence later under microstructures. Now, a structure on the macro level emerges with the fourth use of the word glory. That's because it will occur in section 2 at the point of 27:18. Now you can see it on the screen before you. 27:18 reads, "One who guards a fig tree will eat its fruit, and one who guards his master will be given glory." This use of glory is strategic since it occurs in its section's final verse. As you can see on the screen, following 27:18, we come to section 3, the conclusion, which is a third recap, which will begin with 27:19. So once again, the use of glory in 27:18 is strategic because it occurs in the final, the boundary verse of section 2. In addition, glory in 27:18 once again is positioned line terminal, just as it was in 25:27, in 26:1, and in 26:8. Also, we want to point out the fact that the message of this last teaching about glory, 27:18, parallels the message that's sent by the first mention of glory within this particular sublecture. That was back in 25:27. And here's what we mean by that. Both of these, 25:27 and 27:18, map and indirect a self-effacing route to splendor. That is, glory results as one focuses on the interests and needs of one's superior, not by pursuing glory for oneself. You recall that in 27:18, the exhortation was not to gorge on honey, that would be pursuing sweet things for yourself, but instead to explore, to search out their glory, which we recognize as the glory of God and the King. Now in 27:18, the exhortation is to nurture this fig tree, which represents then, through the parallelism, represents someone other than the pupil. It represents the master. Nurture the master, the person in a superior position over you. And as you do so, glory will come to the one who nurtures the superior person, the master. Next, consider the second macrostructure. It involves opposing attitudes towards reproof, seen in section 1 over against section 2. Here we draw our attention to the expression wise in his own estimation. This appears 3 times in section 1. In chapter 26, verse 5, you see it on the lower left. And then chapter 26, verse 12, again on the left. We're focusing on the expression wise in his own estimation. And a third time within this same section at 26:16 on the right. These have to do with the stupid person and the lazy person, all within section 1. At the same time that the sage fosters through this triple repetition an aversion for such self-absorbed arrogance, he simultaneously creates an awareness that a wise person, in contrast, would behave in exactly the opposite manner. In this way, the sage creates an appetite for reproof. Again, through the negative examples in section 1, we learn that that is not how one should behave, and in so doing, he subconsciously fosters a sense that we should be receptive to reproof. Then when we come to section 2, we find that appetite for reproof amply filled. In fact, all of section 2 is devoted to explaining how reproof should operate. That spans 27, 5 through 18. In this way, sections 1 and 2, by their opposing attitudes toward reproof, are actually linked together. The third macrostructure involves 4 verse recaps that we find in sections 1 and section 3. 3 times in this sublecture, the sage will employ a 4 verse recap to summarize a portion. This occurs twice in section 1 and once in section 3. So in block 1a, the first series of relationships that the sage teaches about, that spans 25, 13 to 24, is followed by a recap of 4 verses in length. That's unit 1a5 that you see beginning on the left of your screen. It begins in 25:5 and extends through verse 28. In block 1b, the second series of relationships that span 26:1 through 26:28 similarly is followed by a recap, which is 4 verses in length. That occurs at unit 1b4. You see it on the left of your screen, beginning in 27:1 and extending to 27:4. Both of these are located within section 1. There is one more recap that is 4 verses in length. It's located in chapter 27, verses 19 to 22. The high number of closural features in this recap recommend identifying it as a section all of its own, section 3, drawing to a close the entire sublecture that began at 25:13. So we see, therefore, this pattern of following a block of teaching with a recap that lasts for 4 verses. It happened twice within section 1, and again in the last 4 verses of this entire sublecture, which we are designating section 3. A fourth macrostructure involves closure regarding the term face. This connects sections 2 and 3. When the term face appears twice in section 3, and they both occur within 27:19, that double use builds on the occurrence of the term face only 2 verses earlier, and that was in section 2. Chapter 27, verse 17. Let's read those. First, we referred to 27:19. Just as water reveals the face to that face, so the motives of a mortal reveal to that mortal. And 27:17. May iron by iron grow sharp, and may a person sharpen the face of his friend. Both of these verses speak to the need for self-improvement along a vector of increasing authenticity. By that we mean transparency with a friend in verse 17, and transparency which means awareness of inner motives in verse 19. Yet each verse concentrates on a distinct agent. In verse 17, the agent of self-awareness is someone else, a peer. There, with a friend's help, the courtier may overcome his own character dullness, replacing inutility with greater effectiveness in life. In verse 19, it's not the help of a peer that the sage commends, but the pupil's own reflexive insight, achieved by scrutinizing his own likeness as it comes into view, exposed in the mirror of his own inner motives. The next macrostructure has to do with closure involving the term motives, which connects sections 1, 2, and 3. In section 1, the sage reveals that ostensibly generous acts performed for a neighbor may in fact conceal a sinister underside owing to wrong motives. The expression there in Hebrew is lev ra. We find this in 25, verse 20. It reads, "One who pulls off a garment on a cold day, vinegar on soda, such is one who sings songs to the tune of wrong motives." What seems to be conveyed here by the sage is pulling off a garment, helping someone off with their coat, would be ostensibly a generous act, unless it's a really chilly day. Then that generous act becomes cruel. Vinegar on soda evidently would be expressing a gift, pouring out some vinegar, giving a gift of this liquid. But if the destination of the liquid is soda, then it ruins the soda through the chemical reaction. So what's ostensibly generous becomes harmful. Singing of a song, ostensibly uplifting, but what if the tune to that song is quote-unquote wrong motives? When we look at the way the grammar of this last phrase in 25:20 is expressed, it's conveying that there is a melody that goes by the title Wrong Motives, and that's the melody that is supporting the ostensibly cheerful song. But with wrong motives, clearly it's going to be harmful. This verse is located in section 1. In section 2, we'll want to pay attention to chapter 26:23. 26:23 reads, "Silver consisting only of silver dross," that means low-grade reject silver, "which has been overlaid on earthenware, such are persons who set lips on fire with wrong motives." The picture that's being portrayed here is exterior or ostensible value silver, which is not even high-grade silver, concealing a poor-grade core, that is mere clay or earthenware. So exterior shiny value that's concealing a low-value interior. This is what's actually the case with persons who set lips on fire, that is, they stir others to action. But they stir to action fueled by their own internal motives, which are wrong motives. They're not stirring people to good action. They actually have ulterior motives. In the closing section, that is section 3, the sage underscores the diagnostic importance of paying attention to motives. Here we're going to look at chapter 27, verse 19. 27:19 reads, "Just as water reveals the face to that face, so the motives of a mortal reveal to that mortal." Here the sage teaches that nothing can more effectively reveal to a person what he is truly made of, better than an unvarnished view of his motives. Thus we see that the term motives shows up in section 3, and when it does so, it's drawing together earlier threads in the tapestry of this sublecture, threads that were woven into both section 1 and section 2. We'll segment the video at this point, resuming with the remainder of the macrostructures in the next portion.